Large construction projects and many government jobs depend on a competitive bidding process to get the best price and to ensure that the specifications are met. Contractors and vendors, working from the buyer's specifications, must be able to make fair and accurate cost estimates to increase the chance of winning bid awards. And after being awarded a contract, they must be able to meet the specifications and the deadlines and make a fair profit. It's a simple concept, but to be a successful bidder, you must know how to get low and how to make money. Competition is tough and getting tougher. You have to know how to do your homework. In this program, we will examine how successful low bidders got low and made money. We will look at the techniques for cost estimating, learn some bidding strategies, and see the benefits of cost engineering. Are you getting your share of contracts? Do you often miss out by just a small margin? Do you really know how to be a successful bidder? And when you do win a contract, are you certain that you can control your costs and make money on the project? Are you willing to just gamble on having good luck? Listen to what Joseph A. Brown has to say.
Hi, I'm Cindy Moran, and this is Joe Brown, a professional construction cost consultant with over 35 years' experience in estimating or reviewing government and private construction jobs, totaling nearly $10 billion. Joe, you've been in this business a long time. Does construction cost estimating and bidding have to be a gamble?
Well, it certainly can be a gamble. In fact, soon after I graduated from the University of Florida, my boss came to me and we were talking, and he said, you know, construction is the biggest legalized gambling in the racket in the country. And I was startled and taken back, and I said, well, what about the stock market? And then we thought a bit, and you can lose your shirt in the stock market in the same way you can lose your shirt in construction and bidding. And it's important in the stock market that you study the market and learn. In the same way with construction, you need to learn the tricks of the trade in construction, the tricks in estimating and in bidding construction. And that's what we're here to talk about today.
You mean to tell me that there are actually tricks for winning bids and making money?
Absolutely, but not really tricks, but tried and proven techniques. In fact, over the years at Kennedy Space Center, when we were doing jobs from $5,000 up to $1 million or multi-million dollars, in fact, I thought that many of the bidders bid the job too low. And then I looked at some of the other bids, and they were too high. And some of them were really just right, especially when I knew they were right in line with the government estimate. But thinking back from the 1960s to the present, many of the R&D projects in private industry were costing 2 to 5 times the original estimate. In fact, some of them were costing as much as 10 times the original estimate. These overruns come from the problems in engineering and construction.
Were these kinds of problems unique to big projects?
No, not at all. But on big projects, there are bigger chances for bigger cost problems and very serious problems for the bidders and the buyers. But even on the small jobs, you can have big cost problems, and there's not as much leeway for the contractors to make up for them.
Can you give some examples?
Sure, there are several high-profile jobs that come to mind, some that you may have heard about in the news. We've all heard about the Alaska Pipeline. That was an enormous job, 800 miles of pipe, 48-inch pipe, through fragile terrain and heavy permafrost. The estimator had 3 requirements when he made the estimate many years ago. One, he had a world globe, he had a piece of string, and the requirement of the 48-inch size pipe. His budget estimate for that was $900 million. Cindy, can you guess what the actual cost of this project was?
I have no idea. $1 billion?
No, actually, it was closer to $9 billion. Wow. That was the 10 times item we were talking about earlier. In another famous project, the Channel Tunnel, or the Chunnel as it has been called, was budgeted at $5 to $8 billion. Last I heard, and we're still working on the final figure, but it's going to be near $20 billion. Also, a couple of international airports are examples of how badly things can go wrong and get out of hand. A friend of mine jokingly called these Murphy's International Airport Number 1 and Murphy's International Airport Number 2, after Murphy's Law, that if anything can go wrong, it will. In one, the original budget was $110 million, but they wound up paying near $310 million. The other one was even worse. They expected to pay $1.5 billion, but had to come up with near $5 billion. Of course, these were extreme examples. They were cost-plus projects, and they were change order jobs, so the contractor still made out okay. But more important now is concentrating on good, accurate cost estimating, bidding, and construction. To help other bidders, we need to look at how the successful low bidders have gotten low and made money. We need to look at techniques for cost estimating, some of the strategies for bidding, and techniques for cost engineering. It will help to know how government estimating, as used at Kennedy Space Center, has been more accurate. If bidders understand the techniques we use in cost estimating, they can profit by applying this knowledge to their own work.
What can you share with us?
Well, several years ago, around 1967, I guess, I began to analyze the process of cost estimating, of bidding, and profit. I tried to figure out how the bidders were succeeding in winning bids and making dollars. There are a lot of stories out there, and we've discovered a lot of good techniques.
Joe, are these techniques that anyone can use in any type of construction?
Yes, anywhere, anytime. I've come up with over 80 ways and 15 basic keys that can be used to become a more successful bidder and make money. Beyond that, I've developed a highly sophisticated method of calculating in advance of bidding what a job should cost. Then, when the bids come in, I'll know whether they're in the right ballpark or not. For example, we used this process for advertising for bids for the Space Station Processing Facility in 1991. Most Kennedy Space Center projects are not only highly complex, but they simply have no precedent. They are things that have never been built before. Well, on the Space Station Processing Facility, the successful low bidder was only 1.2% below the estimate we did in advance. And this on a job totaling almost $57 million. Now that's really accurate. Bidders can also use this knowledge. The same 15 keys we use to get low and make money.
Those are interesting stories, Joe, but what are the main principles that bidders have to follow? What are the big ideas, you might say, that come from this?
Well, Cindy, that's why we're here today. Now let's take a look at the 15 basic keys. The secrets for success in bidding and for making money on a job lie in several basic principles. I like to call them the keys to success. Some may seem more obvious, some are easy to overlook, but they're all very important, and here they are. Ingenuity, which means resourcefulness and inventiveness. Using your head. Imagineering, combining imagination with engineering, and being able to see beyond merely adding up of the numbers. Efficient management. You have to carefully and efficiently manage every aspect of bidding and construction. Creativity. Call this intellectual inventiveness, putting known ideas together to get new ideas. Cost engineering. You have to engineer the lowest possible cost into the project. Detailed cost estimating. You can't overlook anything, even the smallest details. Analysis of projects. You'd be surprised at how often projects are not thoroughly analyzed. That's one reason bidders fail to make money. Cost control in construction. This is where things can really get out of hand. We sometimes forget that getting the bid is only part of the battle. The other is controlling the cost of the job. Hard work and teamwork. This may sound obvious, maybe even trite, but hard work and teamwork are vital to success. Good labor productivity. This goes along with the previous key pretty much, but there's a bit more to it. Here, you actually have to get a handle on how much happens for each dollar spent. Detailed planning and scheduling using the critical path method, or CPM. and of course, taking full advantage of computer technology for bidding, estimating, planning and scheduling, design, and cost control. You can do things now that you just couldn't do a few years ago. Limited competition. Bidding, strategy, and limited competition pretty much go together. Strategy has to do with picking and choosing, selecting the best jobs to bid based on your company's experience and the capabilities and reliability of your subcontractor. And limited competition can be a part of this. If you bid on projects where you are not likely to have much competition, you have a better chance for success, and you probably can get higher markups. There are ways to find out how many are bidding on a project, who they are, even on government jobs. And finally, there is continuing education and keeping up to date on construction methods. Everything is changing so fast, and there are so many new materials and techniques coming out all the time that we can't afford not to keep learning. That's what this video program is all about.
The success stories and the tools and techniques you will see here in the next few minutes are all applications of these basic fundamental principles, Joe's keys to success. Let's look now at the first of his success stories.
Several years ago, a public service agency in Jacksonville needed a large, low-cost building, combining display, manufacturing, office, and warehousing space. They needed to consolidate many scattered outlets and operations. This job was a good deal for both the buyer and the contractor, and everyone learned some important lessons. The buyer got a building of over 30,000 square feet for a bargain price, and the contractor still made a profit. This was an example of what can be done with teamwork, with everyone working together toward a common goal. It was also a construction management job where the owner hired a firm to manage the entire project from design to completion. The contractor used an in-house design, kept overhead low, agreed to accept a low profit, and got the best prices possible from subcontractors.
The next story comes from the construction of a parochial school also located in Jacksonville. The low bidder got low and made money on this project in 5 major ways. By using novel construction methods, by analyzing quotes from vendors and subs in order to get the best prices, by keeping job office overhead low and payroll taxes and insurance rates low, which was possible because of a good safety record, by accepting a low profit margin because it was for a church, and by limiting competition through the use of specialized design and construction techniques and bidding strategy.
This job illustrates how important ingenuity can be in getting low and making money. The contractor's low bid was based on a novel idea, a reusable blocking and bracing system. Conventional methods would have required the use of steel shoring to support the second floor while it was being formed, poured, and cured. This would have cluttered the first floor slab area to the point that further work on the first floor would have been almost impossible until the concrete had cured and the shores were removed. In addition, the steel shores would have to be rented. Instead of locking himself into traditional methods, the contractor developed a unique blocking and bracing system using 2x4 and 2x6 dimension lumber placed temporarily on the lower flanges of the steel beam framing and aligned with wood shims. This eliminated the cost of renting steel shores and kept the first floor area clear so that work could move ahead while the second floor slab was being poured and cured. Following the cure, the 2x4s and 2x6s were removed intact and used in the wood partitions for the building. This resulted in substantial savings on materials. Further cost economies were achieved by closely analyzing the window wall sub-bid and breaking it into several smaller bids for glass, for panels, for caulking, and for solar screens. The contractor got the best prices and avoided the usual subcontractor's markup by purchasing directly from the various suppliers. While the calculated profit was fairly small for a job of this size, the work was important because it not only kept the company active, but it also helped establish a reputation for economical, imaginative work. The detailed cost estimate summary shows the costs for subcontracts, labor, materials, and overhead, together with the final figures showing the total cost, the profit, and the bid.
Sometimes, of course, things just don't work out, but there is always something to be learned. Here's a story about how a lot of work went into figuring a bid and how the bidder got low. Unfortunately, the contract was not awarded due to a lack of funds. The story is interesting, however, because it shows that there is usually a lot more than one way to get low.
This job called for a new design for a concrete vaulted roof for a church building. The design required 10 arches, each 70 feet long. In the attempt to get low, the bidder figured the job 4 ways. One method was to cast the arches on site in a sand mortar mix and then lift them into place with a crane. The second method called for casting the arches in place using reusable wood forms. A forklift would be used to lift and move the forms into position for the next pour. The third method would also have the arches cast in place, but use reusable tin and wood forms. Again, a forklift would be used to lift and move the forms. The fourth method, and it turned out to be the cheapest, was to subcontract the arches to a company specializing in casting pre-stressed concrete shapes at their plant. The finished arches would then be trucked to the construction site and hoisted into place.
Figuring the cost of each of these 4 ways took a lot of work, but it was a necessary step in being the low bidder. Would precasting always be cheapest? Not necessarily. Every job has to be figured from every angle to get low and make money. Now, the next story shows the disadvantages of purchasing from a sole source, and also shows the importance of effective cost control once a job has started.
This job involved building a girls' high school in Orlando. The low bidder on this $200,000 job won because of being able to get the lowest sub-bid on the electrical work and limited competition. Some close figuring and cooperation was needed. A major contract requirement in this job called for leaving a number of trees in place. Careful analysis of this and other environmental concerns resulted in being able to meet the contract requirements and still maintain profitability. But shortly after work got underway, the problem started. A particular brand of steel floor and roof decking was specified in the contract, making it a sole source item that would cost over $20,000. But a strike at the decking factory was causing delivery delays and was holding up construction. The general contractor on this basis justified to the buyer that a different source was needed for the decking in order to keep the job moving. A decking product of equal quality was located. The alternate was less expensive by far, a savings of $4,700, proving that sole source procurement can be very costly. This job also proved once again the need for tight and effective cost control procedures. As the job progressed, the general contractor learned that the concrete supplier was billing for more concrete than was actually being delivered. If through good cost control procedures the general contractor had not discovered this, much of the profit margin would have been lost. The job continued to be a management challenge. Labor called a strike due to certain perceived grievances, and as luck would have it, the contracting boss was away to Europe on vacation, leaving Joe Brown in charge. A team effort led by Joe averted the strike problem and kept the job moving to the benefit of everyone. Good teamwork always pays.
To find out about our next story, we visited with a friend of Joe Brown's who happens to be a construction superintendent. Jim, Joe said that you knew about a very clever idea used to build dormitories at a Florida university.
Yes, there is an interesting story with this, and a bit of ingenious work too. As you know, the lift slab method has been used for years. In the lift slab method, steel columns are erected to form the backbone of the building. Then the floor and roof slabs are cast at ground level. After the concrete is cured, the slabs are lifted into place with jacks. Saves a lot of time and labor, and it's usually safer. In the dormitory job, we went a step further, and it made a big difference. We precast the slabs in the usual way, but before we jacked them into place, we marked each one to show where everything would go. Walls, plumbing fixtures, everything. Then we loaded them up and before they went up. We would load roofing materials, masonry like bricks, tile, walls, partitions, plumbing fixtures, toilet fixtures, anything that was going to be used on the slab, we put on that slab. Then we used special jacks to lift them up into place, starting with the roof, then the top floor, on down to the first. We really saved a bundle in time and labor that way, getting the materials up where they would go without extra handling. It's a pretty good example of imaginative engineering and creativity, and a plus for the lift slab method. There's always a better or cheaper or faster or safer way to do a job. You just got to use your head.
Thanks, Jim, for that insightful story, and we're going to catch up with you a bit later on.
Thank you. All right, let's see over here.
Sometimes the benefits of ingenuity and creativity can come from merely not overlooking the obvious. It's easy to fall into the trap of doing something a certain way simply because it has always been done that way. Take the case of a stretch of Interstate Highway 4 being built through Orlando some years ago.
When the bids for earth moving for this section of the roadway were opened, one out-of-state contractor was about a third lower than anyone else, and he got the contract. The other bids were quite close to each other, so the local bidders were saying, "He can't do it for that bid," and sat back to watch him lose money. But they all figured on doing the job in the conventional way, hauling thousands of yards of fill dirt from a borrow pit several miles north of Orlando. What they didn't know was that the low bidder had a better idea, and it was right under their noses, or their boats in this case. The low bidder had quietly obtained an option from the owners of a nearby lake to dredge fill from the lake if he got the contract. Then after the contract was awarded, he used dredges to scoop out the bottom of the lake and trucked the fill the short distance to the construction site, thus saving considerable money and time that would otherwise have gone into excavation and hauling from the remote borrow pits. There was a fringe benefit, too. The lake owners were very happy with their new, deeper lake. This was, of course, before the increase in environmental concerns and environmental permitting, so it probably could not be done again, but it's a good example of using imagination and ingenuity, and not overlooking obvious ways to sharpen your bidding and make money.
For the next set of stories, we'll go to some of the construction jobs that had to be built to make the United States a leader in space. Kennedy Space Center has been the scene of some of the largest and most complex construction projects ever attempted. The first story comes from Launch Complex 17 at Cape Kennedy.
2 new umbilical towers were needed at Launch Complex 17. The government estimate on this job was $275,223. As was typical in those days, there was a wide range between the highest bid and the lowest bid. In fact, the high bid was almost twice the low bid. The methods, which the various bidders planned to use, were probably the reason for the unusually wide bid range. Therefore, the construction method selected by the contractor probably was most responsible for him being the successful low bidder. Instead of constructing the towers on site, the contractor prefabbed them in sections and transported them to the site where they were assembled. This saved considerably on both time and money. Another factor in this story illustrates the importance of good labor productivity and cooperation. The first tower was erected by the contractor's open shop ironworkers. In the interest of fairness, the contractor then engaged closed shop ironworkers to erect the second structure. The labor cost for the second tower turned out to be competitive with that for the first tower because the closed shop ironworkers wanted to prove, and indeed they did prove, that they could be as successful and as productive as open shop ironworkers.
Sometimes getting low and making money requires something other than a good knowledge of construction and a sharp pencil. Here's a story that caused quite a stir early in the Moonshot program.
The service structure at Launch Complex 34 had to be altered or modified for the Saturn 1B program. The low bid, a bid over $3.5 million, was almost $1 million under the highest bid of over $4.5 million. According to the story, the general contractor's attorneys proved to the state of Florida that the mobile service structure was a moving vehicle with its own wheels and track, which it was. So they got a motor vehicle license tag for it and a sales tax exemption number, thus saving the 3% sales tax. It turned out to be a very clever move because the difference between the low bid and the next lowest bid was only $11,667, a difference of less than 0.5%. This was clearly one for the lawyers. It was also an example of the benefits to the bidder of limited competition. This next story is about another mobile service structure, the big one at Launch Complex 39, which was used for the 363-foot-tall Saturn V moon rockets. Once again, there was a very wide range between the successful low bid and the highest bid, and almost $1 million between the low bid and the second lowest bid. But note also how close the successful low bid was to the government estimate. The low bidder used a combination of ways to get low and make money. The methods used were again extremely important. Rather than attempting to build a huge structure on site, the contractor prefabbed large sections and shipped them to Kennedy Space Center on barges, where the welded sections were assembled. This technique added to the contractor's profit margin and saved time. This was also a good example of value engineering, often referred to as VE. Value engineering is defined as an organized effort directed toward analyzing the function of systems, equipment, facilities, and supplies for the purpose of achieving the required function at the lowest overall cost, consistent with the requirements for performance, including reliability, maintainability, delivery, and human factors. The value engineering concept goes back to World War II, when critical materials were hard to get. Manufacturers were forced to use substitute materials but needed to produce products which met the performance specifications. Since then, the basic philosophy has become much more sophisticated and more useful. But it's not something that can be added on. Value engineering must begin in the earliest stages of design and be carried forward throughout the design and construction phases. Value engineering in this project involved many complex elements. In addition to prefabbing the sections and barging them to the site for erection, the contractor's studies showed that welding the structure would not only add to the profit margin, but would also save NASA a considerable amount of dead weight load, which was very important to the use of the crawler transporter. The combined weight of the huge Saturn V rocket and its mobile service structure was over 12.5 million pounds. The construction of the buildings and service structures and other facilities that ultimately led to the moon landing and other bold United States achievements in space was often overshadowed by the excitement of the rocket launches and the startling pictures coming back from space. But these buildings and facilities were and are essential to the space program. It's no secret the space program has been very costly, but quiet behind-the-scenes work by a lot of dedicated people has saved millions of dollars of taxpayers' money over the years. Labor is always a big cost factor in any job, as our next story illustrates. After the vehicle assembly building was completed, it had to be outfitted and equipped for the special work and heavy lifting required to assemble the Saturn rockets. This included equipping the cavernous high bays. In bidding to outfit High Bay No. 2, the successful bidder came in about $250,000 under the government estimate for the job and more than $2 million under the highest bidder. This was possible because the low bidder was an open shop contractor and the competition was not. Also, the low bidder prefabricated and assembled the 10 extensible platforms. They were weighed at ground level, then lifted into place with the overhead crane. Florida is one of 20 right-to-work states. People in these states are entitled to work, whether they are members of a closed shop or not. According to studies, open shop construction usually saves about 30% of labor costs compared to closed shop construction, and construction time is reduced by about 15%. Our purpose here, of course, is not to endorse or recommend open shop over closed shop. We all know closed shops can be highly beneficial to workers and employers alike. But the fact remains that being a successful bidder can easily hinge on labor costs alone. To be successful, you must be able to estimate labor costs, including payroll taxes and insurance, very accurately. And once the job is underway, you have to manage and control labor costs.